Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Now it's 1 o'clock, so get started. First of all, thank you so much for choosing our session to come. Believe it or not, I counted, and there are 20 other lively discussion sessions that are going on at the same time. So we really appreciate that you choose our program to come, and I hope that when we wrap up, probably in 1 hour, you will find that you make the right choice. Good. So I introduced myself a little bit, and I have two fabulous co-presenter or co-facilitator, because this is not a presentation session. So they will introduce themselves more. My name is Min Tong. I'm the business librarian at UCF, University of Central Florida, and I have been with UCF actually for about 12 years, but I've been a business librarian just for a little bit over 2 years. So relatively, I'm the early career business librarian. So I have Steve here. Steve, actually, unofficially, I haven't told him that I'm going to say that. He's my mentor, even though we haven't, before we met each other, I've been reading Steve's Liaison Life, his wonderful blog. I really, if you're a business librarian, I highly recommend you to read them, because it's really a learning, experience for me. So I learned a lot. And Cynthia is really experienced business librarian, 25-year experience. So I'm really honored to co-facilitating this session with two of the fabulous business librarians in our business librarianship board. So I will pass it on to Steve. Steve is going to talk about our agenda. We are more a discussion session, so feel free to speak up and stop us anytime probably.
Thank you, Ben. So here's our agenda. Items 3 and 4 will be discussion centered. We'll have some breakout discussions with full group discussions as a conclusion, with 5 being, of course, being conclusion, final thoughts, ideas, some summary of what we're talking about. And this image here is supposed to just represent the nature, or at least explain our title. So this is not true of all of you, and we do look forward to the diversity that you all represent in terms of like kind of work you do. But one way of looking at it, there are users and your institution, patrons, staff, faculty, academic research centers, other things. And they work with us liaisons. And then for many of us, if we want to have a new purchase or renegotiate something or just have an impact that involves collections, we work with people that make final decisions. So we're kind of in the middle in that regard. And I know this model is not true for every institution, and we'll talk about that later today. And Cynthia will give us a little more breakdown of that. But that's sort of the big picture. Before we move on, though, let's have all of you introduce yourselves, if you would, please. How about just name, institution, and your role or job title? And let's start with you, Gretchen, if you would.
Gretchen Gould, University of Northern Iowa. I'm the Interim Resource Management Coordinator.
Hi everyone, I'm Kim McDonald. I work for one of the publishers, Wiley, and I'm here to just learn more about what this role does and what it means to the decision-making process.
And Dan Hickey, Librarian for Business and Economics at NYU.
Kelly LaVoice, I am the Business Information Librarian for Collections at Vanderbilt University.
I'm Breezy Silver, I'm from Michigan State University. I'm the Collections Coordinator and Licensing Librarian.
Lauren Ryder, Penn State University, Business and Economics Librarian.
I'm Jason Sokolov, I'm the head of the Business Library at the University of Washington.
I'm Robert Robbins, I'm a representative for a French book dealer. I'm a lead, and I work with subject liaisons all the time.
Hi, I'm Jessica Wall. I work for JSTOR, so just here to kind of learn what subject liaisons do and how you guys work with the collections librarians.
I'm Sarah Lavelle with Edward Eleanor. I'm an account manager.
I'm Ginger Cole, I'm from LexisNexis, and I'm here, this is the first time attending this conference, and I'm here to learn.
I'm Christina Frusmart with EBSCO, I'm product manager.
Ian Hertz, Winston-Salem State University, Business Reference and Electronic Resources.
Sean Penashiro, Stanford GSP, Collection Development.
Nathaniel Gray, ProQuest, and I do Collection Development.
I'm Mark Scott from Lehigh University, I'm the Business Data Librarian.
I'm Chris Franz from Institute of Information Services, and I'm an account manager.
I'm Carol Kramer from Wake Forest University. I'm head of collection management.
I'm Brian Petrilla, University of Minnesota, European Studies and Digital Scholarship.
All right, very good. Thank you all. We're going to give just very shortly a few more details about our roles and how that ties into today's discussion before we get into step 2. So over to Min.
Yes. So when we were preparing for this session, I joked that probably only I need to do some introduction about my institution, because I know that all of you know about UPenn and UCG. But University of Central Florida is one of the 12 public state universities in Florida. We are located in beautiful Orlando. And we do have something unique. We are the #2 largest university in the nation. So this is actually the 2018 stat. We enrolled 68,000 students, so it's a really big institution. But believe it or not, we only have one business librarian. That's me, so I'm kind of superwoman. Okay.
So I am Cynthia Cronin-Carden. I am the resource development or collection librarian and reference librarian for Lippincott Library, which is the business library at the University of Pennsylvania. So I am dealing with all the folks at Wharton. And I'm very happy and grateful to be with these two presenters as well. Steve is the most supportive co-producer or presenter we could ever work with. So,
Well, Cynthia is, I think, one of the most established business librarians at Charleston Conference. You've been here a long time, so thank you for that, giving us a model. Just briefly, I'm a business librarian, a general library, so I work in the main library. We only have 2 libraries, a big library and a music library. Many other details are there in case you're curious. Okay, and Cynthia is going to give us one detailed model of decision making, which will be our launching point into our first discussion topic after that.
So for me, this is a typical decision-making flowchart for purchasing or subscribing to a new database. And what I am trying to demonstrate here is that the influence of the liaison, me, initially is very high and involved in the initial contact with the vendor, what they have to offer, do I want to trial it? And then if we move forward and have a trial, I and my colleagues decide if this is something that we want to pursue, at which point I then need to create a request form and submit it to the Collection Development Committee that manages all of the subscriptions for all 14 of Penn's libraries. At that point, my role diminishes greatly, and the library decision makers and the vendors take over. The library decision makers review my form, they make comments, they have added questions. I need to get a little more information and revise. They then give conditional, very conditional approval and the takeover for all of the contract and licensing issues that might arise, and there's lots of them always. That they give final approval. We have to pay before the vendor obviously activates the subscription. And by now I am, just hoping and praying I'm going to get the product. The other thing is I was trying to demonstrate this timeline that initial contact and wanting the database is very short, but by the time you get to contracting and licensing and final approval, it can take for one database up to a year before it's approved, and that impacts my job because by then the person who requested it has missed their deadlines, and their research schedule is very messed up, and they're not happy about it.
Thank you. So next we will just talking about from three perspectives, three areas like content, pricing, and licensing, how to make your case to the person who is holding the purse string, so to speak, your decision makers. So from content's perspective, I come up with a few thoughts. I think it's just some starting points for you to think. I'm sure you will have many more wonderful tips as well. So we hope that we will be able to gather that during our discussion session. So the first thing probably is that sometimes our subject liaisons, we forget that not everyone is in this field. So when you are making your case, probably try to avoid using too many jargons in your field, so the decision makers can have a better understanding what this product is really about. So how can it support your program? That ties to the second one. I think especially match the content with the specific programs, especially those ones that has recently been added to your degree or your program and things like that. I have an example in my mind is I think last year we had just added the entrepreneurship track to one of our master degree in management science program. So a faculty, we used to have BIS minor. Now all the business librarians probably know BIS minor actually is pretty good. And it's really kind of indispensable, I think, in supporting entrepreneurship. But because of budget issue, we cut it, and one of our faculty really liked it to bring it back. And at that moment, I was able to tie this new track with the request, saying that BIS minor is really good to support the new track for this master degree program. Now, next one, of course, give them some kind of pressure. The neighbors has it, so why shouldn't we? But the peer, okay, the key is the peer. So I cannot say, oh, UPenn has that, why shouldn't we? Okay, that won't fly at all. So I will say, University of South Florida has it, so probably we should consider that. So I think that's something probably you can name a few peer institutions. Now the last one is how to know your existing resources well and know the limitation of your existing resource. As BIS minor, I know it's very good benchmarking tool, and we really don't have anything else in our existing resource. So I can say this is really a nice addition to our existing resource to support our entrepreneurship program and things like that. So that can make your case a little bit more effective. And next one, I believe Cynthia is going to talk about pricing models.
One of my big issues, especially for business databases, is that they can be really, really expensive. And how do I justify this cost, and how do I make it more manageable in my limited budget that I can prove to the decision makers that, in fact, I can afford to take this on. So some of the things that I have tried are multi-year contracts that the annual increase becomes a smaller percentage than it might have been. The initial buy-in is less. We also have on-site only or on-campus only databases like Bloomberg, Morningstar, CapIQ, a few others, and that helps reduce price because we're limiting even more the number of people that are actually going to use it, and it's more likely to be the core people in business that are going to use it, because I'm also required to, anything I subscribe to has got to be accessible to the entire Penn community, which is huge. I also have partnered with departments or schools to split the cost. So that can be a little bit of a nightmare for the people who are handling the money. But it can really be helpful, and it's a demonstration that the department or school is really committed to this resource and they really want it. And finally, we need to educate vendors and explain the limitations of academic budgets. A lot of the vendors I'm dealing with are commercial vendors, and they don't understand that I really don't have a lot of money. And we can recommend alternative access options such as the multi-year contracts or in library use only. And now Steve is taking over.
Final topic before we turn you loose for the first group discussion. Licensing, and everyone here knows about licensing issues. Some products have licensing that's pretty easy to work with typically, and some don't. And it's not just business, nurse, health sciences, other sciences, other examples I can't think of right now. Certainly also have challenging licensing terms, and as liaisons in the middle of the process, we need to work with our money people regarding why this pain in the butt license needs to be worked on or pursued anyway, or can we talk to vendors that some of their licensing terms simply aren't feasible for us, maybe they are. And so that's a challenging point, and it's more so for some liaisons, some subject areas than others perhaps, where these issues come up quite often. And we've talked about some of you talked about this yesterday actually, so I'm not going to expand on this, but you may certainly want to do so as we get into our discussion topics.
Yeah, sure. So right now is the fun time. We are going to have some group discussion. So here are just some thoughts for you too. You can, as long as you are talking about collection development and subject liaison is fine, but here are just some framework that helpfully can help you with your discussion. So we are asking, what are your biggest challenges in terms of content, pricing, and licensing when pitching a new subscription? And because we know that we have actually a good mix of representatives from each group. We have some head of collection development, probably Carol, and we have subject liaisons. We have some vendor friends here. So if you are a subject liaison librarian, what other strategies do you use when you are pitching to your decision makers? We like to hear that. And if you're a decision maker, how can your subject librarians better communicate and work with you? If you're a vendor friend, how can you better assist the subject librarian with making their case to the decision maker? So we like to hear from each perspective. And how should we do that?
We can discuss that.
Yeah, you can discuss that. Discussion. Yeah, we would like to of each group to volunteer as a spokesperson for your group, and we will probably give 5 minutes or something like that and summarize what your group talked about.
Do you want to form small groups? Sure. Okay. Maybe 4 to 5 persons. And let's try for some diversity, like let's have the vendors spread out and the collection development heads spread out, so that there's different points of view. And as Min said, these are guideline questions. If you want to talk about something else, please do, I'm going to stop you. And we will circulate and see how you're doing and try to determine when we should reconvene to share the topics. So please, go ahead.
You might have a little bit to contribute.
We want to break this off. It sounds like everyone's really engaged in conversation, and that's great. But we want to hear what each group has to say. Was there any consensus? Were there any big points or big ideas? And if someone from each group can share, that would be awesome. So, Dan?
We can start. We had a lot of vendors here and decision makers.
Do you want to use the mic, or
do you want me to?
Yeah. For recording purposes, probably.
For recording purposes only.
Sure. So we talked a bit about how the liaison librarian can help translate kind of the sales pitch to the content decision makers within the library. So thinking about it kind of as like a win-win situation. One idea was like disclose your client list so we can select our closest peers or aspirational peers to help make the case. What else did we talk about? you guys. I think we also talked about
Contacting faculty.
oh yeah, please don't directly contact faculty unless it's a substantive interaction. Like if it's a substantive interaction where you're really talking about your research, if you're a vendor, like please do bring that forward to us. That's super meaningful. But don't waste our time, and help the faculty member save face. If a faculty member comes to us and says, "I want this," and we're like, "How does it benefit your research or teaching?" And they say, "Well, I don't know, I just thought it sounded cool." like that's not great. Like, please tell us what the priority is. So those are a couple things.
So your group, it sounds like, was very focused on vendor liaison or library.
Yeah, that relationship, just based on the nature of who was in our group.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you very much. How about the auditor? Some brave souls over there. You can just do, if you don't want to come over, it's fine. Just speak from over there.
For accessibility, I would use the microphone. So we were a small group, but we had all three perspectives, which was really interesting. And I think one of the things we talked about is sometimes there are tensions between subject areas, whether that is kind of a humanities science tension, social science tension, and that can kind of come into play in these larger groups. So it's really important to have collection decision makers who are not subject liaisons to kind of have this broader overlook where they're looking at the whole university, the whole budget. They're seeing statistics we don't all see to kind of neutralize that discussion. We also talked a little bit about how sometimes we have challenges with content we buy that's not, the usability isn't always great. So sometimes the content is needed and there's a program, but we need to do a lot of marketing about how people can access that particular content. So that was mostly what we talked about. Thank you very much. Thank you, Kelly. Any other groups? You can just, okay, great. Thank you.
We came up with maybe it will be great to have quite kind of a questionnaire or some kind of templates the patrons, when they are using the trial, can answer the specific questions, and the liaison, subject liaison, can come to the decision maker with this questionnaire and say, okay, this is needed to this and this research, and there is no other product that can be used in our library, and what is the usage statistics and so on and so forth, that is kind of can support this decision. This is first thing. And the other thing is, I think it will be great if vendor can have, we all decided, have a presentation or webinar about usage before or during the beginning of the trial, to ensure that all users during the trial can give the best of it.
Yeah, very good.
Anything else?
Okay, great. We're looking at these groups. Thank you.
Is that okay, Becca?
Thank you.
So we had we actually, two of us were librarians, right, and the rest were others. And I think we had a good conversation. Well, I think the two takeaways I'm thinking about is, like, even with the two librarians, what kinds of institutions we were representing, I realized how complicated it is, just how hard it would be to be in a sales role and to work with varying institutions in the ways that they work and the way budgets are allocated, and especially in times where we're lucky to have flat years, right? So like, I might have opportunities that my colleague in the group does not, but it's so kind of invisible and opaque to people in sales roles. That said, the one thing I think we did talk about a little bit was licensing. And I was thinking about the process that Cynthia laid out, and how, especially with, I know we're overrepresenting business librarians in this room, but and we're also like, we're total like pains in the neck, right, about licenses, and we're dealing with a lot of commercial vendors that just don't adhere to, you know, kind of the good practices and the established and well understood practices of most academic and scholarly publishers and platforms. So I've actually started to try to flip that sequence where maybe we're looking at the contract first doing a kind of a quick review of that, like not leaning on our one licensing librarian centrally to like do all the hard work of negotiating, but maybe like do a quick assessment of how that looks before we start talking about price, before we start talking about even the contents of time. So I don't know, that's just something that definitely came up. And the other thing, I was just looking at this, I'm trying to remember what it is. So for all of you vendor and publisher representatives in the room, if you've not heard of it, there's something called the Shared Electronic Resource Understanding, SERU. It's kind of like a non-contract contract that basically just says, we're going to do our best to ensure that that nobody's violating our, the content or the usage, and we just have this agreement. And it short circuits the whole need to go through a whole labor process. So it was something I just thought of, and I've not been terribly successful at getting a lot of vendors to adhere to it, but it's a nice thing to know that exists. And especially if you're very academic friendly, it's maybe something to offer up at the beginning.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Any other ideas, thoughts? Thank you.
So I think the last part from our group was, because there was 2 vendors and 2 librarians, we got both sides of it going on over there. But I think we were talking about how hard it can be for vendors to even know the processes that the libraries go through and who does what, and basically the struggle for the poor vendor reps, and how they just talk. We just need to make sure we're talking to each other. And the other part of it was making sure that the vendor reps can be our advocates with the companies, especially when you're getting into those licenses that are pretty brutal. You get the lawyers in there that don't know, the corporate versus academic thing. So working with being our advocates.
Thank you. That's really good. Thank you very much. So we will move on to the next topic. Actually, I think some of your topic already, your discussion already touched on that. But we're talking about our vendor funds. How do we, how can we influence vendors about product development, pricing, and licensing and subject liaisons, but not budget controllers? So we all know the final decision maker, but we do have somewhat kind of impact. So how should we go about doing that? And how else can librarians and vendors work together? So some of you actually already touched on that. But these are some 2 topics that probably, if you want to mix with other attendees, feel free to do that. But if you want to convene your group again, so we'll give you another 5 to 8 minutes to talk about this. Thank you very much, and we'll come back together.
Well, and like I've said, so it's always going to be on.
Before we wrap up, again, so you have a chance to have just, again, some reflection for the whole group each of the subgroups now. Who wants to? Okay, thanks, Breezy. So it's only right that you go first this time.
So we got a little bit going on, a couple of topics. So the first thing was to librarians need to value their expertise. A lot of times we're kind of quiet, vendors are looking for feedback, and so we do have something to say, we need to say it, let's say it first. And then the other part we really got into was communication, so making sure that communication was going both directions, setting expectations. Was that pretty much it? Thank you, Gracie. Okay, any other thoughts?
+1.
Okay, +1.
I mean, it's basically something, but yeah, that's it.
Great, okay. How about the other groups that add more about influencing vendors? Kelly, do you have anything?
What else did you talk about? Besides
Yeah, what else?
valuing expertise and communicating both ways.
This isn't a test.
So kind of twice, we talked about EBSCO's Business Librarian Advisory Board as like a structured way to get disciplinary feedback on products. And then we also talked about how like other institutions, like pricing, licensing, and product development are all pieces, but like think about your product offerings for vendors. How can you link those product offerings to trends that you're hearing academics talk about here at Charleston? Things like alumni access, different things like that.
Very good. Thank you very much. Any other thoughts? Okay, thank you, Kelly.
So if I'm repeating, I'm sorry because I wasn't here, but one of the things that we mentioned was the idea that some vendors don't have a dedicated academic salesperson, and because of that, so for example, 3 of us in this room right now are all talking to different people at the same vendor with all the same concerns, and I feel like it's a little bit frustrating, and if the same person was hearing all of our feedback, it might lead to more fruitful discussion, because they would understand this isn't a one-off issue. A lot of these universities are structured the same way, and they kind of have the same issues with compliance and terms. So you can definitely tell when a vendor understands the academic market, and I think it's worth it to have somebody special. Even if the sales value isn't as much, maybe as the commercial market, your clients can really tell if you understand their needs.
Very good. We haven't covered that yet, so it's all good. Any other thoughts?
What about the teams in the back? And remember, Ian wears 2 hats, which overlap with today, so I don't know if you have any insights.
Can you talk back and forth to yourself?
I'm the only child, so that helps too. So our group, we have a couple of vendors, and one of the most interesting things I heard about the vendors is if there's a problem with a product and they recognize it and they go to their higher ups, hey, maybe that should be fixed. It's not going to happen. But if we as librarians complain about it, 2 weeks later you'll get that title list link, for example. They also are not always responsible for their platform or the content. They're just delivering it. So they have a lot of channels that they need to go through and steps they need to take in order to get the thing that you asked them to resolve fixed.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other thoughts? So round 1, round 2. Jason?
Yeah.
Last chance. Thank you.
Sure. Since we're the last, I will say that I don't think we talked about anything unique for what we've heard already. Is that fair, group? So I will just take the chance to talk about pricing. And for the message for all the publishers in the room is flexibility. If you can offer any kind of flexibility, I think one thing that I know that I heard from some of my colleagues yesterday in a business librarian-oriented session is the idea of, I think a lot of publishers have like a very clear pricing structure in place, and it's usually dependent on how many students are enrolled. What I think the business librarian community has been trying to push is, well, maybe you don't really think about the 53,000 people that go to school at the University of Washington. Maybe you think about it in terms of the 2,000 that go to the business school. And that's, I think, part of the negotiation that like often librarians don't really aren't equipped to do. So I think, but if there's a way to look at creative ways of pricing that don't undervalue the product, but really acknowledge the true potential user base, as opposed to this idea that we're giving away all this content to 53,000 people, so we need to charge $30,000 for it. If there's some room to negotiate there, I think it proves to be a good investment for us and active usage.
Thank you, Jason. Any final comments from your discussion? Last slide, and we do hope to hear from you one more time. So just 3 final thoughts, and you can read those without me reading them to you, as we try to summarize and maybe come up with some best practices. What other final thoughts or recommendations do you have, regardless of whether you are a collection librarian, vendor, or subject liaison? Go ahead, and I can repeat on the microphone.
One of the first slides mentioned the timing of the request form, and I saw that it fell after a trial period. I would like to see the request form submitted before the trial to see if there's even a need for a trial, as there may be a comparable item already that could save everybody time. And I was just curious about the timing of when that would be offered to be filled out.
So should there be a request form before the trial exists? Cynthia, do you want to respond to that? I mean, can you jump back to slide 6? Min's chart. I'm sorry, that's Cynthia's chart.
I think that what happens, I mean, for one thing, my university is huge, and the collection development committee that is the decision makers is looking at requests from so many other schools and libraries, and I am often dealing with unique databases, and I think I need to know if it is going to work or cover the areas where I need information before I start putting in forms that may wind up going nowhere. So that's how the process has wound up working for us. Other comments?
I'll make it. From the vendor side, sometimes we give trials and then nobody looks at the trial. I don't know if anybody admits that, but so and that's really frustrating. I mean, obviously for everyone involved. So at least over the last couple of years, if someone's requested a trial, I don't want to sound I'm too harsh on this, but I'll say no. Let's do a WebEx. And have them do, or you have to do a WebEx first, then I'll give you a trial. But at least if they do a WebEx, then at least you know you've got an audience there who's looked at it and you've shown them around, instead of just putting the trial where they tuck it away for a month and forget about it. So, and I would, on the business librarians or others on the library side, I think vendors are always willing and eager to do a WebEx, and that can be more productive than a trial. So, or at least a supplement to a trial.
I think that's an excellent point, and we try and always have a WebEx first, so we're sure that we understand the product. We can't possibly give it a fair trial if we don't even really understand how it works. And, but I think that's a great point, John.
But I have a question to librarians here. Is it difficult to get actually patrons to use this, to participate in this WebEx or webinar? Is it difficult to kind of combine people together and say, okay, participate in this?
Yes.
Well, you also you want to think about who you invite. So if it's a product and I know of certain faculty or maybe sampled students to try to include, but I'm also weary of showing something I don't 100% know we have the budget to get, even if we love it, and then having a bunch of people see it, think it's coming, and maybe it is coming, but they're going to graduate before it happens, or maybe they like some aspect of it, but then I find something else that I realize, oh, that license agreement won't get signed, or that limitation is an issue. So you always really kind of have to think about who you bring in, and if they understand that a trial really is just a trial, and sometimes a trial will lead to a purchase. It's kind of a hard thing.
The other hard thing I think is just culturally, and I don't think this is just limited to business school, but faculty and students, to spend time on anything, even like a 50-minute WebEx, they have to see the value in using that time, and contributing to like library exploration is not really a high priority for most faculty, I would say. What I tend to do is involve faculty at the point where we have a trial, after like librarians have vetted something through WebEx, and it's like, we have a month-long trial of this, could you just take a look at it? I was thinking of it for this class, and just give me some feedback. And that way they can do it on their own time, spend 20 minutes, half an hour, and and if they have questions, of course I would put them in touch with someone from the publisher, but it usually doesn't get to that stage. Sometimes it's hard to even get someone to commit to looking at something.
And I actually bought something recently, and this is my good publisher moment, where they forgot to turn off a trial for like a year, and it was embedded in a bigger platform. And they realized that this heavy did usage, and it was so much better than I would have thought it was. And that usage spoke to me in a way that the original trial hadn't. So I said, oh great, we can't turn this off now. So it was unintentional, but that really is the reason. Our librarians alone didn't decide that we needed to have it, but based on the student usage, we said, oh great, they really liked this. So it was an accident, and the vendor joked, she said, I might try that again with others.
So maybe the lesson is, give us everything for free, and 3 years later, when we're about to retire, maybe, we'll see which ones really got used. Okay. Any final comments, or questions, or ideas?
We don't have our contact information here. You know where to go. Okay.
Thank you all very much for participating today. We hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and thank you again.
Thanks very much.